Hi everyone, my name is Steven.
Hi, I'm Jelle.
Today we're going to talk about the new .NET 8 features that released a few weeks ago. So we're going to talk about a few .NET 8 features, a few ASP.NET 8 features, and of course also C# 12.
Very excited. So
Yes.
I've seen a little bit. I've taken a short dive, played around with it just a bit, but I understand that you have done a very thorough
Yeah, I tried my best to
deep dive.
to include some demos. So my plan is to first have a few slides with a few small updates, and then we're going to dive into code because that's what we like.
All right.
So that's the plan.
Very good.
First, of course, the new .NET 8 release includes a lot of performance updates. So they have worked a lot on performance, and we'll also see that on containers. They've made containers smaller, faster, and a lot of trimming.
Yeah, by now performance gains are what we expect.
Yeah,
from each new update, but still. I'd rather have them than not. So that's
a major part of this update. So
yeah.
it's very. There are also some benchmarks of how fast .NET 8 is compared to .NET 7, and there's a huge gap in performance. So it's very nice to see
that's great.
that stuff, especially runs faster on startup.
So is this like a performance gain where we're like, okay, if I don't change anything, my app will get faster, or do we need to fine tune it a bit?
No, it's mostly out of the box. You get it straight away. Just update to .NET 8, and you can leverage a lot of those performance improvements. But you have also some extra tooling to make it much more performant.
That's good.
So a lot of trimming and stuff to improve. So that's always that's also the case for .NET MAUI. Not a lot of new features, but they focused a lot on performance and stability. So that's always nice to see in a release update that they focused on stability.
We focused on stability.
I think they said they completed about 170 pull requests and about 700 issues on GitHub. So they were busy with a lot of quality issues. That being said, there's also some updates on Blazor, and the most important update for Blazor will be additional rendering modes. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, we know the rendering modes that we already knew. So the interactive server, where you just run your logic on the server and it streams it to your client, and then it automatically works. And of course the WebAssembly, where everything is run on the client in WebAssembly, and you don't really interact with the server except for initially downloading the entire package. That's the two rendering modes that we knew.
We know those.
And the problem with that was you always had a few edge cases where you wanted a bit of both or none of some. So,
so I'm guessing that's the hole that they dove into for this.
Yeah, that's what they focused on this time. So they've introduced two new rendering modes. The first one is the static server. So that just means the rendering is happening on the server, and it's just static content that's streamed to your client too. And that makes it a lot easier and faster. But it also supports streaming rendering. So if you have a lot of content, for example, you have a products page with 50 products you want to show, you can use stream rendering to render your layout and your HTML DOM, and while it retrieves those products from the server, and maybe retrieves those images from a CDN or whatever, and then as soon as it has that additional content, it will place it in the pre-rendering. So that makes it a bit, especially for the user, it makes it a lot of interactive, because you immediately see that something is happening, and the user isn't waiting for the entire stuff to be completed.
It's not necessarily actually more responsive, but it will feel a lot more responsive.
Yes, especially that. So that's a nice thing. That's static server rendering mode. But the most awesome rendering mode, I think, is the interactive auto, and that just means it will decide what needs to be done. So it will be the new default, and basically what it does is the first time you you go to a page or you interact with the application, it will download it will go to the server and it will download the stuff to your client.
Yep.
The response. So it's fast on the first time because it doesn't have to download the entire WebAssembly at the first time. It just runs on the server for the first time, and while it does that, it does on background. It will download the WebAssembly information, and the second time you interact with that piece of your application, it will render from the WebAssembly.
Yeah, so really weird form of caching, basically.
Yeah, it's a very advanced. It sounds very complex, and I think the Blazor.net team it probably is very complex. But the nice part for us is it's very easy because it's just render mode .auto, and then you're basically done.
Unless you're doing something really weird, it will do the best thing for you.
So the only problem is that you will need to take account both scenarios. So you have to your code will be a bit more complex because you need to support both modes. But it will mean that, especially if you have a large application where people don't always use every piece of it, it will mean it will be a lot faster because they don't need to download the entire WebAssembly, and they can just start with that piece of application that they want to use.
So you say we need to take this into account when we code. Is this changing to the interactive auto? Will that be great for new Blazor apps, or is that something that you can convert an existing app easily towards?
That depends on how it depends. It depends on how complex your backend is. So if you have a lot of specific rendering or logic, then it can be a bit more of a hassle to achieve that. Yeah. But in most cases, it will be very easy to use this new mode.
And it will not surprise me if in a few .NET versions we're looking at that this is not only the default but heavily recommended.
Yeah,
and the entire code base works towards writing code that works with interactive auto. Yeah,
I think it will, because what I said, it provides the fastest user startup experience, while also leveraging on a lot of content provided by the WebAssembly rendering.
Yeah, awesome. So Blazor is doing something really, well, not new, but kind of new.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great feature, and I can't wait to start using it on a real application because it's very promising.
Yeah, I think we're moving towards where I would recommend customers, if they don't know what front-end framework to use, I would throw Blazor in there every time.
Yeah, no, so you can really see that the Blazor team is really focusing on that scenario where they want to be a full stack front-end rendering framework that has all the different scenarios that someone could possibly think of. Yeah. All built into this single framework.
Our little Blazor is growing up.
Yeah, it's going adult. So,
besides
Blazor, we've got some native ahead of time improvements. Native ahead of time was, of course, introduced in .NET 7. Still a bit in basic mode, but quick recap: native ahead of time basically says you compile your application while you publish, and it will be compiled for a specific architecture, and then it will be run straight from those binaries, and it will skip the just-in-time compiler that we're used to when building with .NET.
The biggest pros to that would be performance.
Yeah, of course, overhead performance. You don't need the just-in-time compiler. Size of the binaries.
Yes, big one.
And of course, startup improvements, especially. So what they've done, they've added support for .NET, which is really a major thing for me, because that means I can actually start using it.
Fair enough.
And with that support, they have also added support for 46 and RM46 architectures, and they've included support for iOS platforms. So that basically means you can practically use it everywhere now when you're developing in .NET. What they've also done is they made major size reduction improvements. So when you're using native ahead of time, the size of your executable is still what defines how fast it can be started. And one major feature for this is when you use it in containers, for example Azure Container Apps, where your app starts up when you need to, then you really want to have a fast startup, because if you have an application or process that's running for hours or weeks or days or continuously,
startup is
it's not really worth it for you. But if you have those small increments of startups, then it adds up.
We all know that when we demo stuff and we click on somewhere, and it's like, oh no, it was sleeping, it's waking up now. If you have that on your that on your production app, you're not happy. So this is great news.
So that's with those size reductions, they've also added some additional improvements, focused primarily on containers. So I want to talk a bit about that. What they've done is they've introduced non-root user support. So that means you don't have to run as a root user anymore, which is for the security department a very
I forgot this.
Everyone did.
Basically, we now have support for doing stuff a little more securely. Yeah,
this is one of those things you figured from why wasn't this.
I'm assuming it was hard. Next one, we are happy with this.
Next one is quite an interesting one, because they changed the default port for your containers. So if you go to if you publish a container app in .NET 7, you would go to port 80, but the new default is 8080. So that's really one of those things that if you upgrade your project, you forget
you need to know this.
You forget to update your ports, and you think, why is my app not working?
So my first gut feeling is, oh, this sounds like a lot of frustration. Well, do you know why this was done?
Basically, just not really, because it's just a new way they wanted to go, and because the default is 80, 80 is a default everywhere, and they want to make it a bit harder to just publish the default 80 ports. So that's why they did it. And most of the time when your container runs, it runs in an isolated environment where you use something like application gateway or something to route your traffic to your container. And that's where your port mapping will happen. So will be the only place where you really need to make an adjustment.
Yeah, but a nice one to know if you're...
Yeah, this is something you will forget when you're updating your .NET and you think, why is my application showing up?
Timestamp here. Great. All right, so there's more.
Yeah, they've introduced chiseled images, which basically means those container images will be a lot smaller. And that really ties into the native ahead-of-time compilation, because if you have smaller container images, you will have a smaller container, which means it will start up faster. So that's a bit tied together. And what they've also introduced is multi-platform container images, which means that when you publish your container, if you build your container using a Docker file, you can immediately create images for multiple architectures. That was something it was already in Docker itself, but now it's also supported by .NET.
This seems the way that .NET is going. Someone else is a great idea.
Of course.
That's now our great idea, and it works. I'm happy.
I'm fine. I'm fine with that. So the last thing they've added, which is really handy, is OAuth support for your registry. So if you want to,
what kind of support? What are we talking about? Integration-wise, or?
Yeah, and so when you want to retrieve your container images from your container registries, you can use OAuth support. You can use OAuth to retrieve those containers. So you don't. I hope you didn't already use public registries, but if you did, you can use this. And if you use private registries, you have a lot of more options to authenticate.
Awesome.
So that's enough slides. Let's go into our Visual Studio and see for some. Code demos.
Awesome. So while I do .NET 8, that's long-term support, of course?
Yeah, 3 years. So that means that a lot of people will be migrating from .NET 6.
I assume,
so that's...
so there's I just want to shout out the Microsoft installer for .NET upgrades.
Yeah,
I've been using that since .NET 5, and it keeps working. and they've upgraded it.
It's a handy tool, and I must admit the updating keeps getting a lot of easier. So you can really see that they're working on that too, because Microsoft is also invested in you updating your application and going to the latest long-time support as soon as it's out.
Yeah, it's in the interest of almost everybody.
Yeah, because in the end, also with Azure, they're also supporting .NET 6, and as soon as everybody's to .NET 8, they can also improve their Azure infrastructure for that. So
I'm looking at code.
Yeah, this is.
I'm happy.
I've created a small demo project. So this is just a simple web application project in .NET with the weather forecast controller we all get to use. I've deleted that one because I hate that demo controller. So I've got a few things I want to talk about. The first one is a new feature. It's an exception handler middleware. We already had in .NET 7 the ability to use special exception handling process, but we had to define them in your program with use exception handler. And what Microsoft now introduced is an interface where you can handle your specific exception. So I've made a sample exception handler, and basically what you do is you implement this interface, and then you can handle your exceptions in a specific way. So in my example, I've made a simple check that if a specific exception is thrown, I handle that, and as soon as you return true, you basically say from this exception is now handled and continue. If you return false, it will go up the stack and eventually into Microsoft.
Into the next handler until there's no custom handlers left.
Exactly. So if you want multiple handlers, you can just define them in your program below each other, and it will start with first and go all the way to the bottom.
So it's the add exception handler method is chainable. That would be good, because then I can just...
Yeah, it's chainable, so that's of course because it's just the normal builder extension framework. So you can just chain your exceptions, and as soon as it hits something that handles the exception, it will stop processing.
Yeah, this is one in a long line of improvements where I'm like, okay, I didn't think about this, but now that I see it, I'm like, why wasn't this like this before?
Yeah, it's especially because it's a clean way to handle your exception without cluttering your program, and of course a nice way to handle your exceptions if they occur. So that's a small thing they've added. Second small thing they've added is authorization support for your Swagger API endpoints, which means that you could run your Swagger in production, and it's...
Yeah, don't run your Swagger in production, by the way, unless apparently you're doing this.
Exactly. So
another topic. What does require authorization do? Does it hide the entire?
It just the endpoints aren't accessible, and it puts them all behind in authorization. Just your normal authorization that you had within your the .NET framework. So keep in mind that if you use this and you have a .NET application where customers can log in, that you really make sure that not every authorized person can access your Swagger, because if you have a public registration, that still means everybody could use it.
This is a great step, but it may not be enough. Authorization always requires manual attention. Yeah.
It's I think it's a very could be handy in certain cases, but in the end, you really need to figure if you need this stuff.
Yeah, if you're using Swagger, you'll at the minimum you'll need this basically.
Yeah, I've created a small snippet where if you're not in development environment, you need to require authorization, which means that if I would run this demo, you will see that I cannot access my Swagger endpoints. Okay, while that starts up, let me talk a bit about the identity mappings.
You've created build errors. You've been playing around too much.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just gonna
ignore that for now.
Last one, because that's another and then I'm gonna rebuild.
Yeah. So you're showing the Swagger.
Yeah, I'm going to show
yeah.
the Swagger endpoints and demonstrate that you cannot access your.
Yeah, that you need to authorize before you can access it. So that's great.
Yeah, so it's starting up.
Good. So this will be a Blazor app without the weather forecast. It will feel so incomplete.
Yeah, no, that's the first thing I did. I thrown out the standard control because that's.
No, I have a lot of tapings where I do use the weather forecast. So thanks for that. All right, so I'm seeing a Swagger. What's up? I know the answer, but maybe you do too. Why do we see Swagger?
Great question.
Because you're running in development mode,
yes.
I'm assuming.
I thought I added my development, or removed my development tag, but I might have added for another feature.
Yeah.
So let me just go ahead and skip to the next demo for now, because I will need the development
mode.
Development mode for the next features. We can get back to that at the end.
Yeah.
So the next thing I want to talk about is the identity API mappings. And we already saw it a bit when I opened my Swagger, which means this is a nice way to just introduce some standard endpoints for your API, for your identity. So for your registration, login, and everything that's tied to your identity. There's two ways to do it. You can just do it like this and just say map identity API.
Give me all the defaults, basically, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. So that way you just get your /register /login and everything at your base URL. But you can also use the map group to tie everything into a sub route. And doing that will give every route below a /identity in this case.
Yeah.
So if I've adjusted that endpoint.
This is a bit of a minimal API feel.
Yeah, so it's just a nice way to quickly get your endpoints up and running, especially when you're using minimal APIs. That's a fast way. So you can see now that I've got the
that was easy
/identity, and so these are all the endpoints you need for your identity. So that's a neat way to handle your identity. The next thing I want to show is short circuit routing middleware, which basically means that if you have certain endpoints that you just know that need a certain HTTP code. So in my example, I've just added robots and favicon. I don't have them, so I just want to say 404, and I want to stop all the middleware that is tied up in .NET because I know it's a 404, and I just want a quick response and get rid of that open request. So if you have those scenarios, this is a very neat way to just short circuit your middleware.
Yeah. And we've discussed this previously, where the program class is getting more filled. We're centralizing all the code, so it's. Of course, it's all extension methods. So we
so if you want to, the best practice for me is if you create a new project, just create a folder with your extension methods or your configuration, and just put every bundle of endpoint builders or app builders into those separate configurations.
But for demo purposes,
of course, for demo purposes, this is my way of doing that. So the next thing I want to show you is. Let's see where it was. No, it was here. Experimental attributes. That's something I've just commented out, but I will enable it again. So if you have a few endpoints or pieces of code that's still experimental, you can now define those with a separate attribute. And when you do that and someone uses those piece of code or something, they get the warning message that it is experimental. And you can add a diagnostics ID. So the package you're using is the system diagnostics code analysis. And when you do this, you can add an experimental code for something that's not really test it in production. So you maybe you want to publish your application to a separate environment, which includes that code, maybe behind a feature flag or something.
Yep.
And you can use this this branching of this attribute to define it. So the available properties for this are the diagnostics ID, and you can also define the URL format if you want to.
So and this would be if I make a call to this method from somewhere else in the code, I'll get the squiggly lines, or
yeah, you get squiggly lines and you get the diagnostic ID. And if you call the piece of code, it will also get in your logging defined in your console. That
so on the one hand, I'm thinking, oh, of course, this makes so much sense, and on the other hand, I'm thinking, grow up.
Yeah.
if you've written a method, it should work right.
I know, it's just something that probably someone requested and they thought, well, it's not that hard.
Well, I think using it more for analytics purposes, it could be very, very interesting. Yeah.
So the next thing I want to talk about is named DI services. Before I want to do that, I want to also address this to-do I've added, because with C# 12 we've introduced primary constructors, and you can see the squiggly lines because it's already telling me that I can make this a primary constructor.
Yeah.
And what this does is just basically combines your class definition and your constructor definition into one primary constructor, which makes it less readable, more readable, and less code.
It will make it less readable for people who have no idea what's going on. But
it's actually quite neat and clean code, because as you can see, I have now I have a private read-only field, backing field, and in a constructor, we all know this piece of code.
Yeah, and we've written it 1,000 times, and we can now tap through it, and it will generate it. But this is
still, when we're doing it, we're thinking, why are we doing this?
Yes.
And why do we need to address that private backing field? So they kind of solve that, because you can now use a primary constructor, and what it does is it just moves those arguments to your class line, and it just makes a private field where it immediately fills that backing field.
And can I also use the TimeProvider without the underscore if I just remove the private?
Yeah, if you want to, you can also just totally ignore this piece of code and just
go like this.
Go like this. That's something when you use the intelligence suggestion, it will not automatically do that. But
no, because you were of course using the named one. Yeah.
But if you write your own classes, you can just use it like this, and that just means you get rid of those two fields that basically do the same thing.
So I can hear people with years of C# experience crying out. First, all the brackets are dying, and now we're losing constructors. But for people learning C#, this will be awesome, because it's just so little overhead for creating new stuff.
Well, I used to be in that old school camp that just thinks, why would we want to do this? But in this case, I really think it makes the code a lot of cleaner, and also it removes that constructor thing.
If you name a class party service, you know that you have a constructor named party service. That's not a secret. Usually it's even hidden unless you have...
Exactly. And these days, when we're building our services or whatever, the constructor mainly just does your implementation mapping to private fields that you use in the below. So
that's primary constructors, but you were talking about
I was talking about named DI services, because that's also a neat feature. But again, you thought, why didn't we have this already? So let me show you this piece of code. I got an additional service that uses the same interface, and now I want to decide which of these implementations I'm going to use. Therefore, they've added named services, and as you might know, what does that mean? It basically means that when you define your dependency injection, you can add a name to it, which you can use when you want to inject that specific implementation. So in this case, I've got a default and a special holiday one, and when I go to my party controller, I can define which I want to use where. So in this case, I'm using both to demonstrate the differences.
Yeah.
But you will see that I'm using both implementations, and depending on the scenario in your code which you have, you can use either one.
And you named one default. Is that because the first one you inject will be the default one chosen?
No,
or
if you don't specify a name, yes, but in this case the default is just an arbitrary name that I decided myself, so you can put anything you want in this.
So if I don't provide a name, what happens?
If you don't provide a name, you will still get it if you don't use the keyed service. But of course, when you inject, as you can see, it's a separate method.
There we go. Yeah.
And so where you used to just use the add singleton, now it's add keyed singleton, and if you use add transient, it's add keyed transient. So it's separate.
We're creating if else's in our dependency injection.
Yes. Something that wasn't really working in preview yet, but is working in the final .NET 8 version, is also the ability to use this in your minimal APIs. So I have this piece of code, which will not work because I also have my controller defined. But if you see, as you can see here in my minimal API, I can just use that same declaration and use those services as needed. So this is also working in minimal APIs, which wasn't
cool.
in the preview. So that's nice to know.
Yeah, they fixed it, or
yeah, they fixed it.
that's good. Thank you. So that's a lot of. Well, basically, I'm very happy, and it's a lot of. Oh, this feels like something we should have gotten from the start.
Yeah.
But
you can really see that they have a good build baseline now, and they can just make improvements that's really focused on the developer and focused on things you do a lot, and making those easier and less redundant, because that's in the end what it is.
Writing clean code is almost forced upon us.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to show you is a new class which is handy for unit testing, and that's the TimeProvider. So we .NET 7 already introduced the date provider, if I'm not wrong, it was .NET 7. And with that we now also have the same abilities for your times. So basically what you have, let me go to my implementation for a second.
Yeah, I can guess what's going on here.
Yeah, so you have, instead of using just what you used to use was probably something like, local now is datetime now, for example. So instead of using that, you'll be using the time provider, which means it will abstract away the usage of the current datetime. And when you do that, you have the ability to unit test that piece of code without doing some weird stuff in order to make it work in your unit test.
I think this is the biggest. Wow! Why didn't we have this from the start?
Yeah, that's another something you think, why didn't we have this earlier? Especially when they introduced the date provider, you think, well, from there it's a small step to time. But
this is great, because now we can finally abstract time and date. It will make writing tests for certain use cases so much easier.
Yeah, so it's a no-brainer for me to start using this, because it makes your unit tests a lot easier.
And also it will immediately flag this class as using something doing with date and time.
You don't need to do some weird stuff like make an overload where you can pause the date time, so you can use that overload in your unit test or something like that. No. So that's a nice little thing. So when you're using this in a unit test, you can use the fake time provider, and you can use that one to set a specific time for your unit test, and then when you execute the service, it will use that reference. And so one of the neat things is, if you have an implementation that uses a task delay for a few seconds, it will also work with that in your unit test. Right. So if your starting point is 1 hour and you have a start delay of a delay process of 30 minutes, you can actually check if it's 1:30.
It's better than providing a daytime, because now you can actually work with it.
And with that, it also comes the abilities to use for timers and stuff to unit test better. So that's a nice little thing that we can use to make our unit tests more readable and more testable.
Great.
So that's it for me for the most important features, in my case, that .NET 8 provided. So I'm really looking forward to the next .NET version, because you can really see that they're introducing a lot of features focused on developer, and you can also see that when you look at the GitHub pages, they're really the input is coming from the developers, and they're taking that into account. So it's a nice era to live in for that matter.
Well, that's a beautiful way to end this one. Thanks so much for watching. Please play around with .NET 8 as well, and hope to see you soon. Bye.
Bye.